Good afternoon, and welcome to K2's Road to Excellence Part 6 in our partner Adagio by SoftTrack. This is Alan Salmon speaking to you from Brampton, Ontario, where it's certainly not spring, but we've got temperatures certainly above zero. But the shocking news today when I woke up was a snow shower where our deck was completely covered. It's gone now, so hopefully that's the end of it. So let's get on to a little bit of administration work. My good friend Marilyn Benninger is backing me up today, and she is your go-to person for computer issues and questions. Your microphones are muted for obvious reasons. In terms of notes, within 10 days of today, you're going to get a package from Marilyn that consists of the recording of this webinar, my extensive teaching notes and teaching files, and the answers to all the questions that anybody asks, plus, of course, the very important CPD certificate. In terms of questions, you ask them through the chat window. When the webinar is over, Marilyn will collect them all, break them down, and send them to Andrew and myself. We will send her the answers, and you will get them in your package. When it comes to CPD certificates, if you're new to the webinar, 5 times today, Marilyn is going to stop us and put up a polling question. That's a multiple choice question. You don't have to get the answer right, but you do have to select one of the answers and click on submit. And if you're recorded as answering 75% of the questions, you will get a CPD certificate for 1 verifiable hour. If you don't, it'll be 1 hour of non-verifiable. Today's topic, as we move to Excel, is one that I take great pleasure in presenting it, because when we deal with macros, what we're really talking about is a return on investment of the time. Small investment to create the macro and a huge payback over time. So without further ado, let's go here. Now, there's nothing magic about the file that I've got here. It's a P&L for Carl's Computer Shop. And notice that the percentage of income is just November. And I want it so that I have a percentage of income for the month here, and I have a percentage of income for the year to date. So I'm going to show you an example of a macro. And to do that, I'm going to go to the View menu. I'm going to go over here to the macro. And we're going to view the macros that are here. And notice the one down here called Format. I'm going to select that, and when I click on Run, watch the screen change here. So you probably didn't realize it, but it changed it from to income, it changed it to revenue. Notice that we now have a percentage of income for the month and a percentage of income for the year to date. So how did I do that? Well, we'll get to that in a minute, because I need Marilyn to put up the first poll, please.
Good morning and afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us on our webinar today. Your screen should have turned blue and you'll see a question there. We just want to get a sense of who's in the room today and your comfort level with macros. So please check all that apply. If you've ever tried it, if you've ever successfully created, if you know what a personal MacBook workbook is, and if you know the difference between an absolute and relative macro, and I don't, I look forward to learning that. And none of the above may apply to you. We keep our polls open until we see 90%, and we're just right there. Thanks for your quick responses. I'm going to count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to close the poll now and share the results with you, Alan.
Over half. That's about what I expected, Marilyn. So for some of you, and some of what I do, it will be a review. But for a lot of you, I'm going to add some new content. So before we get started, I want to go here and call up this file. What I've shown you here is the actual definition of what a macro is. Series of commands and instructions stored in a computer program that automate tasks. So how did I create this macro that did all of this? Let's get this on here. Well, I turned on the macro recorder and memorized all of the steps that I took, where I clicked, what I typed, what I copied, what I moved, and so on, and converted it into a programming language called VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. And then when I play it back, it just runs through all of those keystrokes. Before we start, though, we have to make a change to our ribbon for most of you. So I'm going to go up to the ribbon, I'm going to right mouse click, and I'm going to customize the ribbon. And down here, you notice the developer tab. If you don't have that already selected, you need to do so. And now you'll notice it's up there. Next point, and that is the security of macros. So I'm going to go to File Options, and I'm going to go down here to the Trust Center and Trust Center Settings and Macro Settings. So up here, you have 4 choices. Disable all macros without notification. If you do that and open up an Excel file that isn't yours, you will have no idea whether there's any macros in it. Disable all macros with notification. That is my recommendation. And what that means is that if I get, let's say, an Excel file from Marilyn that has a macro in it, when I open it up at the very top, there'll be a yellow bar. And I have to click on that to actually open the file. And that's particularly useful because many macros contain viruses when we get them from other sources. Disable all macros except digitally signed macros. That's a very secure way of confirming the data. We don't use that. Enable all macros, not recommended, because then you're subject to viruses. So there's the choices for you. And now that we've done that, let's go back to here and let's actually do our first macro. So I'm going to do some changes here. I'm going to do some editing here. I'm going to remove stuff here. But the key thing that I'm going to do is show you how I get percentage of income by the month and percentage of income by the year to date. Well, the first thing we've got to do is turn on the macro recorder. And there's 2 ways of doing that. I'm going to go to View, Macros, Record Macro. And up on the screen comes the macro name. What do I want to call it? Well, I want to call it Format. And there's a couple of rules about this. You can't start a macro with a number, and you can't have a space between words if you want to use words in your macro. So the standard way of dealing with that is to use the underscore between the words. I could assign a shortcut key, Control B, Control whatever. I don't do that because there's a better way of automating the running of a macro, and I'll show you that in about 10 minutes. Storing macro. I've got 3 choices. This workbook, a new workbook, which I have never done a macro in, or your personal macro workbook, which all of you have, but it's hidden, and I will talk about that towards the end of this webinar. So what's the implication of storing it in this workbook? Well, it will always run in this workbook, and it will also run in any other workbook if this workbook is open. So the name of the game is I open this workbook that has a macro in it, and then I want to run that macro in another workbook. So I open the other workbook and I'll have access to the macro. All right, so we're going to click on OK. And now the red light on the camera is on. Excel is going to record everything we do, including mistakes. And normally, mistakes aren't a problem when I correct them. And for some of you, and the millennials will have no idea what I'm talking about today, remembering Lotus 1, 2, 3. There, we had a macro recorder as well. We recorded keystrokes. And if we made mistakes, those mistakes actually showed up on the screen because of the speed of the computers we were using. With computers today, unless you've really, really screwed up, you'll never notice the corrections. So let's jump in. First thing I'm going to do here is change this to statement of income. And I'm going to change this to revenue. And this to total revenue. And then I don't need this, so we'll delete it. And now we come to the big moves, and that is, how do we get this over to here? Well, we do it this way. We insert a couple of columns. And we shorten this one up. We go over here and we move this column to here. Okay, it's done the calculations. And now we move both of these columns, not move, copy both of these columns to here. And we'll shorten that up. And then something hugely important. I'm done. I got to remember to go here and here. And for the 50% of you that have done recorded macros, I'd be willing to bet that once in a while you forget to turn the macro off. And when you do turn it off and run the macro, the screen dances in some weird and wonderful ways. So now that we have done that, let's run the macro. So I'm going to go to the View menu again. I'm going to go to Macros. View Macros this time, not Record. And you'll notice there's my Format macro right there. I'm going to run it. And there we go. Now, that's a very simple example, but wrap your head around some of the things that you're doing, especially the 50% of you that aren't using a recorded macro, and think of the time that you could save if you invested a little bit of time in recording your steps and then playing them back. Let's move on to something that Marilyn is not confused about. She's never had it explained to you. I'm going to do a very simple macro here, which is that I'm going to type those 4 cells over here, just to show you. Now to do that, I'm going to go to the Developer tab this time, because most of the time I will go to the Developer tab instead of the View menu, because I get a lot of different choices. And you'll notice that the ribbon has changed from that to that. And over here is where I'm going to deal with macros. Now you'll notice Record macro is there just like it was in the View menu. And I'm going to call this macro 2 just for the sake of argument. I'm going to click on OK. and I'm going to type. It would help if I capitalized that. Alrighty. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to stop recording. Now that I've done that, I'm going to put my cursor down here because I'd like this to come down here and not there. And I'm going to go to macros, and there's macro 2. I'm going to run it. Well, that's weird. It put it back there. And Marilyn, that's what we call an absolute macro. What do we mean by absolute? It means that where you start, which in my case is A1, is where that macro is always going to appear when it runs. However, now I want to show you a relative reference, and you'll notice the difference. I'm going to do the same thing, which is I'm going to record the macro over here. But before we do that, up on the Developer tab, use relative reference. I'm going to turn that on by clicking. And you notice there's a gray background. And now I'm going to record the macro, and we'll call it macro 3. And you're going to have to suffer while I type again. And I keep putting in a comma, sorry. There we go. So now I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to put my cursor over here in K1, and I'm going to run the macro. And there's macro 3. Do you get it, Marilyn? If I turn on use relative reference before I record the macro, that gives me the flexibility to run that macro in any cell. If this is off, then the macro is absolute, and it will run in the cell where it first is recorded. All right, where are we going to go next? Well, next, I want to go here. And that's exactly the same file that we used before that turned this into this. But remember what I had to do that. I had to go either to the View menu, do macros, view my macros, or I had to go to the Developer tab and go and do the same thing. And that to me is so much work. And yes, I could have gone here, and let's go to record macro and put a shortcut control something in there. But I like something different to do this. And that is that I'm going to put an icon here that will run my macro. So the way I do that is to modify the quick access toolbar or customize it. I'm just going to delete this. There we go. And when I do that, let's go back here again. In here, I have a bunch of icons. But if I go up here to popular commands and do a drop down, notice that I have a choice of macros. And I've got a bunch here that I've saved. And then down here, starting at ANOVA 1, you've got a huge bunch of macros that do certain things. The problem is that unless you actually run all of these and change the names, I have no idea what ANOVA A1 does. But look down here. There's our macro that I recorded called the format macro. And I'm going to add it to my toolbar, and it did that. But notice the weird icon that it uses. And that is, they all have them. I wanted to delete that. So all of my macros, if I accepted the default, would have this image on it. And it also gives me the name. But up on my quick access toolbar, now, when I click on OK, notice what I've got. But if I had more than one macro, then I have a whole series of these, and I have to remember or highlight it to understand which one it is. So let's take this a step further. I'm going to customize the quick access toolbar. I'm going to go over here on format, and I'm going to click on modify, and there's all the icons. So you select an icon to suit you. I like the happy face. Click on OK, click on OK, and you notice my happy face is there. The key thing is that once I've got this up here, notice I've got the icon and I've got format. And all I've got to do is click on it, and bingo, I'm done. Then the final thing that I want to cover with you is take you backstage with this file right here. And what do I mean by taking you backstage? I want to show you what Microsoft actually records for this macro. And to do that, I'm going to go to the Developer tab. I'm going to go to Macros. And while I'm here, I want to run down the choices here. Run. I don't use this very often, but if I step intro, it will walk me through step by step the changes I make. For example, remember I typed in statement of revenue or a statement of income here. If I edit, that's where I'm going to go when I'm finished this explanation. I will be able to see the code. Create, do a new one. If I want to delete one, I just go delete. And then I go back here and so on. So now watch the screen change when I click on edit. And I bring this window down. So now you're looking at the VBA Editor. And here's the code that created the absolute address and the relative. So let me try to interpret this very quickly. Sub-absolute address is the name of the macro, this macro. And down here, where we see the apostrophes, is text. And it's just telling people that look at the code what it's doing. We go down here to range A1, select. That reflects the fact that I clicked on cell A1. That becomes the active cell. And in that active cell, I want to place K2 Enterprises. I go to A2 and I do the same thing. A3, do the same thing. A4, do the same thing. And then back to A1. Now this macro was designed to put in the address of our US parent. So it is not the one that I did with Fore Valley West, but it works the same way. I'm going to go down here to this macro, relative referencing, active cell, the same thing. But as part of this, I have gone to the relative referencing icon in my toolbar and clicked on it. End sub and the macro. Now, one time I was a pretty good VBA programmer. In other words, I could take and create my own, not doing the recording. I considered myself to be at an intermediate level, and the way I got there was to spend a whole week in a classroom working from 8 to 5. And I suspect that very few of you want to go that route. And what my own coding will allow me to do is to put in loops to do things, put in menus and drop downs and advanced stuff. But for those of you who do recorded macros, and myself, when I do a recorded macro, if I screw up, I may go to this code and modify it. And that's a step above the recording macro. So there you go. I hope I have added content for all of you. And Marilyn, it's time for the last polling question.
It definitely is, Alan. Thanks for that. I learned a lot, as I often do in your company. So, folks, a nice, easy polling question. Do you have repetitive tasks that you do in Excel that take a lot of time? Just a straight yes or no. We're already at 80%. Short questions are good. I'm going to count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm closing the poll, and I'll be sharing the results.
Wow. So my question that I don't want an answer for is I hope that you have learned enough today, if this is your first crack at macros, to do a recorded macros to bring that down from 84% to a lot lower number. So thank you very much. I'll be back to do the wrap. So Marilyn, it's time to do the handoff to my good friend Andrew.
Thank you, everybody. Marilyn, you should know that on my control panel, as far as I can tell, I cannot see the polling questions. So I'm going to, when we want to do polls, I'm going to ask you to post the polls. It's a lovely day in Vancouver today. And just because I can, I'll tell you that there are daffodils in bloom outside my office. You can tell that Vancouver is moving towards gloat season. And that's the season that we have while other people are battling with snow and slush in the east, and we let everybody know how lovely the weather is here. But don't worry, in another 6 to 8 weeks, you guys will be enjoying all sorts of fabulous weather, and it'll still be cold and rainy here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how Adagio works in an accounting and public practice environment, and talk about the things that make it different from Sage 50 or Simply Accounting and QuickBooks, which are, of course, very popular within that space because those would be the accounting software products that you would expect a small business to be using, and therefore they're often used in doing client write-up, although they're not specifically good tools for doing that because they're designed to run a business, not to do client write-up. For those of you who haven't heard of Adagio before, I'll do a little bit of an overview, just a flyby. There are these are slides that I usually include all the time, so that you know how we differentiate Adagio against the other products that you might be familiar with, and just so that I have some idea of the type of people who are on the call today, who are on our webinar today. I wonder, Marilyn, if you could put up the first poll, which just gives us some idea of whether you are actually involved in keeping the books for another organization. So the poll is open. Excellent. So I cannot tell that the poll is open. Marilyn, you get to choose, and I get to.
So the question is, are you involved in keeping books for organizations? Pretty simple. Yes, no, or I'm retired with an exclamation point. So we're right at 90%. I'm going to count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, folks. And I'm sharing the results. So 55% of the folks on the call are involved in helping keeping books for our organizations, 43% are not, and 3% of folks today are retired and hanging out for all the learning that's happening today. Good for you.
Thanks a lot, Marilyn. I also just realized that I was speaking through my speakerphone, so the audio should be a little bit better now. So
It is.
It is. Okay. Excellent. So what's Adagio? Well, multi-user, multi-currency, modular. So if you're doing client write-up and you just need GL, you can buy just that. You don't have to have a system manager. Just the general ledger works fine on its own. You can have multiple people in the GL at the same time. There's, of course, specialized solutions if you're going to install this in a particular business for wholesale distribution or purchase order management or job costing, time and billing. We have a full time and billing appropriate to an accountant's office. As you can see, lots of modules because we've been shipping Adagio since 1999. We've had the same R&D crew for over 20 years, and software is a bit like pulp and paper. You keep feeding the programmers, and they keep producing modules. And so we have quite a complete lineup today. The things that are different, well, we're batch-based. And we're batch-based because in the size of organization that we expect to be running Adagio, we think batches are better. If you work in a public accounting office, you know that batches are good because they give you measures of control. They allow you to train someone new on the office procedures before their data entry gets committed to the accounting. We're designed for an organization managing somewhere between 2 and 100 million, or for doing client write-up. We have quite a few people who are just using the Adagio General Ledger for client write-up. The low end is because the General Ledger costs, maybe $2,000 or so once you've got it implemented and a couple of financial statements designed. And the high number is because it has a lot of zeros after it. But really, that's not particularly meaningful. I've seen a GL batch for $1 billion. So there's very large companies running on Adagio, or at least companies running lots and lots of dollars through the organization. Yes, we can print an accounts payable check for over $1 million. We can... But it's really about the number of transactions that are going through the organization, not the total dollar value. So within the market space that we're in, over a third of our clients are in the not-for-profit First Nation space. So we've done quite a few things of specific interest to that particular accounting requirement. So not-for-profits and First Nations are subject to audit. So we have a very tight audit trail. Makes it very, you can't just change stuff within the accounting system. We understand that budgeting is an important component. Financial statement design is critically important in these organizations because you're doing financial statements to help operational managers manage their budgets, their departments against the budgets that are being set up for them. So we pay a lot of attention to the needs of those particular of that particular community. We expect the people that we're selling Adagio to have a full-time accounting department. I used to say or person, but I've been giving this a lot of thought. And really, if it's just you within the accounting department, you can make anything work. You can even make just straight old Excel spreadsheets work because you know how all the data gets coded, and you know the reports that you want to have come out the other end. And if for some reason the reports don't show the numbers that you're expecting them to show, then you're likely to remember where the transaction was that got miscoded. Whereas if other people are entering transactions, if you print out a set of financial statements and you look at them and say, oh, that number cannot possibly be right, then you go on the great hunt for the miscoded transaction to try and figure out why the numbers on the financial statements are not what you expect. So over 2/3 of the Adagio sites have 2 or more people working in the accounting. And of course, we do not consider salespeople to be part of the accounting department. Even though they may be working with the accounting, they may be looking up customer information and entering orders and managing inventory if they're the purchasing manager and things like that. They're not considered part of the accounting department. We expect there to be at least one person full-time managing the accounting transaction who knows the difference between a debit and credit, understands how clearing accounts work, that kind of information. No IT department. We have a very light technology footprint. You don't need a SQL Server administrator. You don't need a database administrator with Adagio. Once Adagio is set up, it tends to run undisturbed because all the components are self-contained. Our big major component that's external is Crystal Reports. Like most accounting developers, we use Crystal Reports for all of our management reporting. Do not worry, we do not use Crystal Reports for our forms design. We have a separate, simple drag and drop designer, remarkably similar to Simply, except that we shipped it in 1999. We understand that if you're trying to design an invoice, Crystal Reports has way too big a learning curve. And besides, our forms designer allows us to do things like support multiple copies and individual fields to be printed on specific copies. So the person who's doing invoices can print an invoice and have 3 discrete layouts of the form print on the printer without having to do any intervention. We write Adagio for people who actually look at reports. They do financial statements every month. Typically, sometimes every quarter, but usually every month, they're printing financial statements in lots of different formats because they're being used from an operational point of view. The purchasing manager is looking at inventory movement and sales figures. The CEO is looking at sales and profitability by department often. So we are quite reporting phased. And there's an enormous flexibility in the layout of the reports and how they're presented. That's one of the reasons why we're using Crystal Reports as our management reporting. In order to answer, I was asked a question and went and calculated how many different ways you could actually print out the GL detailed listing, and with all the options, if you just counted out all the different ways that it could be presented, and I got to over 22 million different ways that report could be presented on paper, and that seemed excessive to me, but everyone in the accounting space has their own idea of the way that reports should be presented. I'll just give you a little bit of background about the general ledger, because that's the most important module if you're working in an accounting office. We have a 6-character account and 6-character department structure. The departments are optional, and in fact, a department can exist with one account and not with another account, and that's important if you're doing data entry and you want to make sure that departments' transactions are only coded to the departments that are legitimate for a particular account. So just to contrast that with Sage 50, when you set up a department, that department is available for entry in all the transactions that are being entered into the GL. And in fact, you can have departments set up for an account and just code to the account directly, which means that your overall corporate financial statements don't tie to a sum of all the departments, and that's a problem. So this is a way of having some control. The financial statement layout is independent of the chart of accounts. You can put the account number is 6 characters long. You have a 6-character account number and a 6-character department. When you lay out your financial statements, you can put whatever accounts you want in whatever section of the financial statements. So you have complete control of the actual presentation. We support 12 or 13 fiscal periods and a year-end adjustment period. So when you post the year-end adjustments from your accountant, which typically involves moving some numbers off the income statement up onto the balance sheet, you can post those adjustments without distorting the operational statements for period 12 or 13. So 13 is used in retail, 445, 445. 12 is more normal. You can have your year-end be whenever you would like your year-end to be. The fiscal periods do not have to be a regular number of days. You set up your fiscal calendar when you create your GL. There are some controls within the general ledger to make sure that people are posting to the right account. So you can mark an account inactive. So if someone tries to post to that account from a subledger, for example, or just in a batch, then the journal entry will be dropped into an error batch, and you can decide whether to reactivate the account or to recode the transaction to another account department. You can close specific periods in the general ledger. You can say, okay, I've done my final financial statements. They've gone to the board of directors for period 3. I don't want anything more posted to period 3, and you can close the period. And then if anyone tries to post to period 3, that transaction will be dropped into an error batch, and you can take a look at the transaction and decide whether it's material and would require restating the financial statement. So that again prevents errors. And you can also say this GL account only accepts transactions from bank rec or from accounts payable or from accounts receivable to prevent people inadvertently choosing an account and posting it and posting a transaction to it. Again, if a transaction comes through to post to that account, the transaction drops into an error batch, and you can decide whether to make the posting legal or permit the posting in the general ledger or recode the transaction to a different account. The financial reporter, again, budgets. We have two budgets. We have two budget buckets in the year, partly because people start entering budgets before the beginning of their fiscal year. So once you've got approval from everyone that the budgets are good to go, then you can lock them. So that you don't have to do this through security. You can just go into the company profile and say no one can change the budgets from this point forward. But if you only have one set of budget numbers, then it's hard when you're 6 months into your year and the world's not turning quite the way you expected 9 months previously. We have another set of buckets so that you can track what your original budget was and what your year to date is, and then you have another set of budget buckets where you make some adjustments. When you're creating budgets, you can start with zeros in all the numbers, or you can copy the prior year budgets. You can import the figures. You can import just the annual budgets, and we'll spread it evenly throughout the year, or you can import a budget for every specific period in your GL for every account department pair. Unlimited departments, they're optional. Departments have their own budgets. You can put a department budget on the financial statements so you can compare actual against budget for each department. You can close individual departments to separate retained earnings so that you can close departments as you're finished with them. You can also mark a whole department inactive so that people can't inadvertently post to the wrong department. When we, at the end of the day, the financial reporter is probably the heart and soul of the general ledger. And I'm going to talk about the financial reporter a little bit here. To make it easy for a not-for-profit, we allow you to open your budget buckets before you open your next year for processing. So you can start entering your budgets before you start posting transactions to the new year. You can have a financial statement that shows you this year's budget, this year's actual, and next year's budget on the financial statements. When you open up the new year, you can have 2 years open. You have the next year open and be posting transactions into the new year and into the old year at the same time, and will automatically close to the retained earnings account so that you can get a full set of financial reporter. Of course, you close your year before you give the general ledger to your accountant so that they can do the year-end adjustments. And when you post to the prior year in the general ledger, we have that specific posting period. Now, when we were looking at doing financial statements, so one of when you create a GL account in the entry-level products like Sage 50 or QuickBooks, one of the things you say is where on the financial statements this account is going to reside. But in Adagio, the account department coding sequence is completely user-defined, so we don't demand that a particular account go on a particular section of the financial statement. So financial statements are unique, are a unique report in the accounting office because of the problem that, like all things on the planet, charts of accounts move to a state of maximal randomness in the fullness of time. So while you may start with all accounts from 1,000 to 1099 being your cash accounts, at some point someone will come in and not be clear on the concept and make 3240 be a cash account too. So now on your financial statements for the line cash, you need to add all accounts from 1,000 to 1099 plus account 3240. So we have a full spreadsheet-based financial reporter because spreadsheets are where you want to design financial statements, and it has all of the computational horsepower of Excel and most of its formatting capability. You can drill down from a financial statement to the posted transactions and the attached documents, which we flow automatically from the subledgers into the general ledger with all the supporting documents automatically attached to the primary document. So what that means is if you're looking at a credit in the general ledger, you will see the remittance advice for the check and all the invoices that were paid on that check. If it was a system check run for $150,000 of 28 different checks, you will see 28 different remittance advices and all the invoices that were paid by all those remittance advices. So the person who's working in the GL can go and rifle through the filing cabinet without having to get up out of their desk. There's a full departmental security model, so you can say this user can only see these departments, so they can be in the financial reporter looking at their operational statements throughout the month without you having to worry about them seeing other department statements. So Marilyn, I have another poll question for you to put in front of our audience today. I wonder if you could put that poll up. Which is about how important flexibility of financial statement preparation, how important is that flexibility to you? I'll just let you put that question up.
Thank you, Andrew. The poll is up, folks. This is the fourth of 5. And remember, you need 75%. So 4 or 5 answered questions will earn you a verified CPD credit. So your flexibility is either no, somewhat, or yes, or you might be on the call today with not applicable to me. We're already at 90%. Thank you for your participation. I'm going to close the polls now at 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And in terms of the results, Andrew, we've got 12% that say flexibility is not important, 37% say it's somewhat important, 28% say yes, and there's 24% on the call today to which that question was not applicable to them.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just give you a brief idea of what it's like to be within Adagio. There's a full security model because once you get to the size of multiple people working within the financial statement, within the accounting system, you usually want some type of security because there are people who you don't want to be doing stuff. So you can say this person can enter batches and print batches but cannot post them. Here we're in the general ledger as the system administrator. I'm looking at the chart of accounts, showing the budget and the balance and the forecast in my chart of accounts. I could show you many things within the GL that make it nice and easy to work with. If this particular general ledger has 4 departments, 100, 150, 200, 250, I can easily make a new department by making a copy of an existing department. And you'll notice that on the copy dialog, so I create a new department, Central USA. What retained earnings account do I want to close this department to? Do I want to clear the budget figures and clear the forecast figures when I make this, when I create this account? Here's all the accounts that were referenced in Department 100, and I can go through and say, this new department I'm creating can't subscribe to any magazines and won't have a bank account, so I won't allow them to charge any bank fees, and and then when I click the OK button, all of the necessary account department pairs will be created, except for 6200 and 6450. So maybe I'll do that just for, why not? Okay, so now I've made a new department, and if I came back here, here's the new account department pairs have all been made for me. So that kind of management, that kind of, you can copy everything in Adagio, can save you a ton of time. And in the financial reporter, this is a very simple financial statement. It has two columns, current period and year to date for a P&L. I can show this for any particular period. You'll notice when I change the period, all the numbers change. I can also, I'm currently showing it consolidated for the whole organization. I can say that I would like to see it just for this department or for another department. Oh, there's my new department, so it doesn't have very many interesting numbers posted. And I can look for a range of departments, so all accounts from 100 to 150, that's America, and all accounts from 200 to 250, that's Canada. And it's automatically summing those two departments and giving me the numbers that I want. Now, this particular financial statement, you'll see that it's got some generated rows down here because I've asked it to show me in the revenue section all the accounts from 4,000 to 49.99. And I can collapse the sheet, and there you can see the range, all accounts from 4,000 to 49.99. Now, one of the nice things with macros that Alan was talking about earlier today is macros allow you to export a financial statement from an entry-level product, or maybe start with a trial balance and then reorganize it to get the financial statement in the presentation that you want. But the downside of that is no matter whether you're using relative references or absolute references, if someone adds an account into your chart of accounts, all your macros break, everything, all your linked spreadsheets break, and that's awkward. I'll just say that, it's awkward. So account ranges allow, if I added a new account in the range 4,000 to 49.99, it would automatically get summed into this total on my financial statement. Now, of course, in revenue, I would probably want to break this out into product revenue and service revenue. And I'd like this to be the total of these two numbers. And you notice that worked a little bit differently than in Excel. There is a little bit of difference between the financial reporter and Excel. And the reason that we specifically chose not to use Excel was we didn't want an upgrade or an update from Microsoft to break the accounting department's financial statements. So now I've got these two rows here, and I need to change the GL account. I need to change the account numbers for the product and services. So I'll bring up my chart of accounts, my income accounts. So the revenue, the consulting revenues, that's a service. Okay, let's put that in service. I'm just dragging and dropping from my chart of account view, and when I drop here, you'll notice it's smart enough to say, oh, you picked up two contiguous accounts, so you probably want 4,000 to 4010 there. I can also do ranges with click and shift click and say I want everything from 4,100. That's a product revenue. And then database repair revenue, pretty odd company here. So here's an example of, I want you to add together all accounts from 4,000 to 4010 plus account 4,500. The little dash tick afterwards says that I want you to replace the department with whatever has been picked up on the top toolbar. So now we'll take the sales discounts and we'll put those up here. So this is an example of two ranges, everything from 4,100 to 4,240 plus everything from 4,800 to 4,840. And then when I expand the sheet, I see all my individual accounts. If I don't want an account to expand, I just get rid of the dot range command here in cell A1. And when I click expand, you notice it didn't change the total over here. When I click expand, only the service revenues expand to give me the individual accounts, but the product revenue stays properly displayed. Here I missed an account, freight revenue. So I just asked the financial reporter to show me, I'll consider that a service. So reset, verify. Okay, we're all good to go. So now when I expand the sheet, here's all my individual individual accounts. Creating additional columns on the financial statement is as easy as just duplicating the column and changing the specification code that you want. Oops, sorry about that. I'll be putting the budget, or I want to see the forecast for the year, or I want to see the budget year to date. So I can just do that. And when I'm looking at an individual number, if I say, oh, that office expense, that looks pretty high, I can double click and see the individual accounts and departments that got me to that total $10,000 number. I can click on a particular account and department and see what's there. I can double click and see the individual accounts that took me, the transactions that took me to that balance, and I can double click on a particular transaction and see the balance journal entry. So this is the balance journal entry over here, and you'll notice that there's a doc link button here. If I click on the view, I can actually see the invoice that was associated with that expense, and that flowed automatically from accounts payable when the batch was posted in accounts payable. If I want to see all the transactions, I just right mouse click on the total and ask to see all the transaction details. So this is all the accounts, all the departments, all the fiscal periods, getting me to the $10,000 number. You'll notice that I have views next to all of my individual transactions. If I have to send this analysis off to someone, I can click on the little Excel Direct button on the view, and Adagio will drop, the financial reporter will drop the spreadsheet. You notice it comes in as a table. We like tables because you can filter them and put totals in and things like that. So there's the total. But you notice we also have the view button here, so I can click on the view and see the transaction. I still have the hyperlinks in the Excel spreadsheet, and so that I could send this off to someone. And if I showed you, here's the Excel Direct that I created with my transaction details. Here's the spreadsheet, transaction details for 6675, and then this is the folder of all the transactions that were pulled out of the filing cabinet. And you'll notice they're named. This is and here's the purchase order, and there's a purchase order that was pulled out of the filing cabinet. So all I have to do is zip up this folder and hand that to the auditor or the accountant for the year end or whatever else is going on, and get all the scanned transactions or drag and drop transactions, wherever they came in. I can get those and give those to someone. So we'll end with a final question, because of course those transactions have to end up somewhere to get in the GL. Marilyn, you want to post the final poll just so we know people are still here?
Absolutely, Andrew. Folks, there's a question there that talks about scanning every document to help your clients with their data entry. So maybe you have clients that can cope with paper. Maybe only you can handle paper. Maybe you could want to do it, but it's a hard sell. Or electronic documents are definitely the way to go in your practice, in your business. Some of the folks on the call, it might not be applicable to them. We're about 1 minute over time, so I'm going to ask you to put your answers in quickly so I can count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm sharing the results. Well, we'll go from the bottom up. 35% not applicable, 32% yes, electronic documents the way to go. 21% say yes, but it's going to be a hard sell and I wouldn't want to lose a client. Only 5% said no, I can only manage paper, and 7% said my clients can manage paper. Thanks for that, Andrew.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Marilyn. I'll just let people know that this is available. All of this technology is available through cloud subscription at $100 a month for people who are doing this kind of client write-up. And I'll turn the microphone over to Alan to wrap it up.
There we go. Thanks, Andrew. I love the way you've embedded Excel into your program. And by the way, just to clarify something, I'm going to call up. So that's it for us today. I want to thank you for your attendance. And I want to show you one last thing, and that is this. If you want to expand your knowledge, we have a series of paid webinars, and you will get this when Marilyn sends you the package. But one of the things is Mastering Excel Charts. And you click on that to register, and we would welcome your attendance. So thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for all the attendees, and we'll see you the first week in April, where I will be doing tables. It's a wrap.